Container management has certainly become an element that's sort of more and more beneficial for a lot of customers, especially since sort of Brexit as well. But it's a utility whereby a lot of the time the challenge, if you've got one PO per container, it's fairly straightforward. But if you have multiple PO lines on a container at the moment, trying to manage that and update the orders that might be delayed is a little difficult. So this particular module enables you to create a container, have tracking profiles, add different purchase order lines to that, and then update globally, should there be a delay. So if we move now onto the container management side, and there's two aspects to the container management. For those of you who will only ever place one PO per container, for example, or one PO for an order perhaps to China, we've got some tracking profiles on the PO, which I'll show you momentarily. But also for those of you, as I mentioned earlier, who will split multiple purchase orders across a container, again, we can handle that. So the first bit you're going to do will be to create your container size. So we've got a 20-foot container and you can set the maximum payload and volume. Now it's not an exact science, but if I come into our stock control module, I just filter my list, what you'll also find is we've made a tweak to the standard Sage stock module. And you'll have a distribution option in the SciComm folder. So I'll come back to these and talk about those a bit later. This is where we can override for the future sales I mentioned. Down at the bottom here, we can use container management, and you can, if you want to, set up your lengths and widths, work out a volume and a weight. Now, I did mention it's not an exact science because, of course, we're not going to take into consideration how it's packed, but what it can do is you load a container, tell you at what point you're going to exceed the weight and the volume based on the logic we've got in the system. So with that created, the next aspect will be to create your tracking profiles. So we've got PO tracking profiles and containers as well. Essentially, there's up to 8 steps. So for example, for the PO, we've said 1 day for them to process it, 5 days to manufacture. It's on the sea for 15 and so on. So it's a 27-day lead time. For the containers, you can have multiple different profiles. Are they working days? So you create those. If it's just a purchase order, once you've generated and created your purchase orders, whether that's manually or using the material planning, and we go into a PO, what you'll have is you'll have the tracking dates tab here, and you can load up your tracking profile, the one that's appropriate, the date that you're going to place it, and it will then give you your anticipated delivery date based on the date. So if I just move that and say, okay, we're going to place that today, and I just tab through, the 12th of May is when it could be delivered. And what this enables you to do is, if, for example, it took them slightly longer to manufacture, you can change the dates here. So that might be the 22nd, and that's going to have an impact on this date. And as I save, it's going to pop up, or I could just update the PO lines, and that's going to update those lines. If we have also purchased material planning, we rerun it, you're going to see the impacts. You might get some warnings to say that that purchase order may not arrive in time because there's been a delay. You can also confirm the stages, and you can record any notes or any problems. So again, you've got that historical trend. So that's on the individual PO. Where it's a container, slightly different approach. So what you'll do is you'll come into the container management list, you click on your new container, good old Blue Peter fashion again, there's one I prepared earlier. So that's the internal container number. When you get the actual vessel number, you can record it in here. And to add lines to this, you can pick a supplier, and then you can just start to add those lines, or you can pick certain purchase orders and you can just say, okay, yeah, let's add those lines to the container, and they've now been added. And as the volume, you can see the weight there, and it will turn red when you get to it and it's going to exceed it. We also show you the values, so you can work out roughly for your insurance what you need to insure that container for. From your tracking profiles, we can pick our profile, and again, it's the same principle here, but this time when there's a change and it's going to be a delay, when we update the purchase order lines, that's going to update the individual lines for those items against the relevant purchase orders. saving you a huge amount of time and manual input. And again, running material planning is going to take all that into consideration. We have an attachments tab for any documents that you can store centrally, and there's your vessel and your forwarder details as well as analysis codes if you want to be able to report further. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, is becoming more and more popular in terms of a module, especially since the turn of the year.